I want to be very clear about something before I tell this story. I am not a paranoid person. I don't see threats where there aren't any. I don't catastrophize. I spent 8 years in the military and another 6 working in logistics management, and both of these careers require a calm and rational assessment of situations without letting fear cloud your judgment. I say this not to sound impressive, but because I need you to understand that when I tell you I was genuinely terrified during what I'm about to describe, I mean it in the fullest possible sense of the word. This was not me overreacting. This was not anxiety talking. This was real. It was a Saturday in November. I had driven down to visit my parents for the weekend. About a 4-hour drive each way on mostly interstate highway, with the last 40 minutes on smaller state roads that cut through farmland and small towns before reaching the suburb where I grew up. I had made that drive more times than I could count over the years. I knew every exit, every rest stop, every landmark. It was one of those routes that becomes so familiar, you almost stop seeing it consciously. I left my parents' house around 9 in the evening. Later than I had planned, but my mother had made dinner, and I wasn't going to rush through that. The drive back would put me home around 1 in the morning, which was fine. I had done late-night drives on that route plenty of times. Everything was normal for the first 2.5 hours. I noticed the truck somewhere around the 2-hour mark. A dark-colored pickup, full size. No distinguishing features I could make out clearly in the dark. It was sitting maybe 6 or 7 car lengths behind me in the right lane. I noticed it the way you notice any vehicle that maintains a consistent distance behind you on an empty highway. Not with alarm, just with the passive awareness that a driver develops after years on the road. I changed lanes. The truck changed lanes. I told myself that meant nothing. People change lanes. It's a highway. There are only 2 lanes. This is not a pattern. I accelerated slightly, not dramatically, just enough to create more distance between us. The truck accelerated. The gap between us remained exactly the same. I slowed down. The truck slowed down. I am telling you this as plainly as I can. Whatever speed I drove, the truck maintained the exact same distance behind me. Not approximately the same distance. The exact same distance. Like it was calibrated. Like whoever was driving it had decided that 6 car lengths was the number, and they were committed to it regardless of what I did. I kept driving. I kept telling myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe the driver was also heading to the same general area and happened to be matching my pace. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe I was tired and my perception was off. Then I took my exit. The exit for the state roads that led to my hometown was a specific turnoff that most people using the highway wouldn't take unless they were heading to one of 3 small towns in that particular part of the state. It wasn't a major interchange. It wasn't a shortcut to anywhere significant. If you took that exit, you were going to one of those 3 towns. That was it. The truck took the exit behind me. I drove through the first small town. Empty streets. A gas station with its lights on. A diner closed for the night. The truck was behind me the whole way through. I told myself there were people who lived in this town. Of course, other drivers used this road. I reached the fork where the road split toward my hometown and toward the next town over. I took the left fork toward my hometown. The truck took the left fork. At this point, I was no longer telling myself it was a coincidence. I was on a quiet 2-lane road through farmland at 11:30 at night. with a vehicle that had been behind me for over an hour and a half and had made every single turn I had made. I didn't drive home. I want to be very clear about this decision because it might be the most important thing in this story. I did not drive to my house. I drove to the police station in the center of town instead. I pulled into the parking lot, which was lit up and had 2 patrol cars visible outside. The truck drove past the parking lot entrance without stopping. I watched it continue down the main street and disappear around a corner. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and told an officer what had happened. He took my statement and drove behind me to my house to make sure I got in safely. They never identified the truck. I still drive that route to visit my parents. I still take that exit. I still drive through those small towns on those quiet state roads at night. But I never leave after dark anymore. And I check my mirrors every 30 seconds the entire way home. Every single time. I had been planning the road trip for almost a year. Solo cross-country drive from Seattle to the Florida Keys. 6,000 miles. 3 weeks. Every detail mapped out in advance. Which roads to take. Which cities to stop in. Where to stay each night. I'm an organized person. I don't do things impulsively. I had a printed itinerary, a detailed budget, a fully serviced car, and a list of emergency contacts who knew my route and expected check-in times. I am telling you all of this because I want you to understand that what happened at the rest stop in rural Montana was not the result of carelessness. I had been careful. I was being careful. Sometimes careful isn't enough. It was day 4 of the trip. I had driven about 8 hours, and I was starting to feel it in my shoulders and lower back the way you do after a long day behind the wheel. My GPS showed a rest stop about 12 miles ahead, and I decided to pull in, stretch, use the facilities, drink some coffee from my thermos, and push on for another hour before finding my motel for the night. The rest stop was small, 1 building with bathrooms and a vending machine, a covered picnic area, a gravel parking lot with maybe a dozen spaces. When I pulled in, there were 2 other vehicles, an RV at the far end of the lot with its lights off, clearly someone sleeping for the night, and a sedan parked close to the bathroom building with nobody visible inside. I parked, grabbed my thermos, and went to the bathroom. When I came out, the sedan was gone. The RV was still dark and quiet. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and there was a man standing next to my car, not leaning on it, not trying to get into it, just standing next to it, close to the driver's door, facing away from me, looking out at the dark highway beyond the parking lot. He was tall, dark jacket. I couldn't see his face. I stopped walking the moment I saw him. I was about 30 feet from my car. The building was behind me. The parking lot was empty and dark beyond the pool of light around the bathroom building. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Then the man turned around. He was older, maybe late 50s. He had a normal enough face. He looked at me and smiled and said good evening and asked if I was traveling far. I told him I was just passing through. He nodded and said he was waiting for his wife, who was in the bathroom. He said they were heading to visit their grandchildren. He was friendly, conversational, completely normal on the surface. But he was standing directly next to my driver's door. I told him I needed to get something from my car and walked toward it. He didn't move. He stayed exactly where he was as I approached, which meant that to get to my door, I had to essentially reach around him. I said, "Excuse me," and he stepped back, maybe one step, barely enough, and I unlocked the car and got in and locked the doors immediately. I started the engine. He was still standing there watching me, still smiling. He raised a hand as I reversed out of the space. A casual wave, like we were old friends. I pulled out of the rest stop and got back on the highway. 10 minutes later, a car appeared behind me. I couldn't tell the make in the dark, but the headlights were in the same position as the sedan that had been parked at the rest stop. When I arrived, I accelerated. The car accelerated. I took an unplanned exit toward the nearest town I could see on my GPS. A small place, a few streets, a gas station that was still open. I pulled into the gas station and went inside and told the attendant I thought I was being followed. He was a young guy, maybe 20, and he took it seriously immediately. He called the local sheriff. He let me stay inside until the deputy arrived 20 minutes later. The car that had been behind me was gone by the time the deputy arrived. He drove the highway in both directions and found nothing. I skipped my planned motel that night and drove 4 hours in the wrong direction to a larger city where I checked into a hotel with an indoor entrance and a deadbolt and a chain lock and a chair wedged under the door handle. I finished my road trip. I made it to the Keys, but I never stopped at another rest stop alone after dark for the rest of the journey. I still think about that man's hand raised in a wave as I pulled away. How practiced it looked, like he had done it before. The road I'm going to tell you about is one I drove regularly for almost 3 years. A rural highway connecting two small towns about 45 minutes apart. I drove it for work. My job required me to visit a client in the smaller of the two towns twice a week, every week, and this particular highway was the most direct route. I knew it the way you know any road you drive repeatedly. Every curve, every hill, every farmhouse set back from the shoulder, every mile marker, especially mile marker 9. I first noticed it in the spring of my second year of making that drive. I was heading back toward the main town after my Tuesday client visit. It was dusk, that particular quality of fading light that makes everything look slightly unreal. And as I passed mile marker 9, a standard green and white reflective sign set into the grass verge on the right side of the road, I saw a woman standing next to it. She was facing the road, standing completely still, wearing a light-colored dress that seemed wrong for the weather. It was cool that evening, the kind of evening where you want a jacket. She was looking directly at my car as I approached, and she was still looking at it as I passed. I slowed down instinctively. Then I thought about stopping and thought better of it. A woman standing alone on a rural highway at dusk was either in trouble or she wasn't. If she was, I should call for help rather than stopping alone. I called the non-emergency police line when I got back to town and reported a woman standing alone at mile marker 9 on that highway. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check. I didn't hear anything after that, and I forgot about it within a few days. 3 weeks later, I was driving the same route at roughly the same time of evening. Dusk again. That same fading, unreal light. I passed mile marker 9. The woman was there again. Same position. Next to the sign. Facing the road. Same light-colored dress. Looking directly at my car as I approached. I slowed almost to a stop this time. I rolled down my window. She didn't react. Didn't move toward the car. Didn't speak. Just stood there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read in the failing light. Not distress exactly, not a request for help. Something else, something I didn't have a word for. I drove on. I called the police again. This time, I gave them a more detailed description. The dispatcher sounded less dismissive than the first time. She said she would note it and have a car check the area. This continued for months. Not every drive, not every Tuesday and Thursday, maybe once or twice a month. Always at dusk, always at mile marker 9. Always the same woman in the same dress, in the same position, next to the sign, looking at my car as I passed. I asked around town carefully, without being specific about what I had seen. I asked a few long-time locals whether there was anything notable about that particular stretch of highway. The third person I asked, an older man who had lived in that area his whole life, went very quiet when I described the general location. Then he told me that about 15 years ago, a young woman had been killed on that highway, a hit and run. She had been walking along the verge late in the evening. The driver was never found. The case was never solved. He told me the accident happened at mile marker 9. I requested a different route for my client visits the following week. My employer accommodated the request without question when I explained I had concerns about the road's safety. I have never driven that highway again. I have never told anyone the full story of why, until now. That is it for today. Stay healthy, stay safe, and be close to your loved ones. And I'll see you very, very soon with a new video. Subscribe.